Hi, Zizaran here with another league starter for the upcoming Crucible League, and this is probably my favorite league starter. The only reason I'm not starting this myself is because if I start it again, people would probably yell at me. Explosive Arrow Champion is incredibly strong, and not just is it a good starter, but this is something that you can keep increasing the gear of and actually take out all the Ubers. Very, very cool build. The only downside would be it is not like direct damage. You're not right clicking and instantaneously dealing damage. You're putting down the totems and then the totems attack and then your damage goes off. That being said, it has insane damage uptime because you can focus so much on running around dodging, throwing down a new totem when you want to, and that makes that it feels like it has more damage than it even does on paper, because a lot of builds don't always have higher damage uptime. A few downsides is things like dots will absolutely crush this build. Standing in degens, you will just see your HP just... So what has changed since last time? We're losing a cluster called Rampart, and the restoration changes affect us a little bit, and you won't be able to run Defiance Banner unless you make a Loathing Helmet. With everything in mind, this is still an insanely strong starter. The early leveling, like first 30-40 levels, might be a little bit slower than before, but an absolute powerhouse. So this build ends up being really good for bosses, farming, mapping, everything. It can really do it all, and it's incredibly tanky. If watching these videos helps you have a good league start, please consider subscribing to the channel as it helps me and my team a lot. So this is using the third-party program Path of Building. If you don't know how this works, click this video card thing. As per normal, we are doing a step-by-step leveling so that it's very, very easy to follow. You can see like keep expanding and changing depending on what level you are. You can also see that ascendancies are baked into this. And you can see here with the endgame stuff and the endgame gear, we were getting around 4.9 million DPS, not including the hit. So this is just the Ignite and Burning Ground. And then the hit itself is pretty substantial in this build. So that means that you can actually clear maps that have like Ignite immunity and stuff. You'll lose the majority of your damage, but it does actually still do it. So in that corrupted map, it wouldn't be useless. So you can see here that we start leveling with Splitting Steel. We currently have Onslaught in because Path of Building does not have the momentum support gem. It's just not in there. Splitting Steel has been nerfed, so that's very, very important to keep in mind. Till level 28, it is going to be a lot rougher experience than if you played it in the past, just because it's weaker. Obviously, over level, try to get a little bit better gear, but thankfully, it is just like till you get level 28. Once you have Explosive Arrow, there's not anything that's really changed that would make leveling worse than normal. Especially if you can pick up a Quill Rain early, and especially for the leveling process, taking the Mastery with increases in reduction to projectile speed, also applied to damage with bows, is extremely good. Because early on Explosive Arrow, we're pretty much hit-based. We don't really use Ignite or Burning early on. As soon as you hit level 28, all you're looking for is either a Quill Rain or a short bow with attack speed. Getting plus gem level isn't super important. You just really want to make sure attack speed is everything. The number one thing that people that are struggling with the build have in common when they're coming to me for questions is that they're using like a 1.3 attack speed bow or something like that. And that's because our damage it's so important that we're able to get close to 20 fuses. So 20 explosions in the target. It basically increases our damage exponentially. Pretty much everybody is just throwing in 20 stages and expecting they have that. But sometimes a slower bow with more damage would look like it has more. Because if this was, you know, a different bow with slower attack speed and I was only hitting 10 fuses, you can see it literally cuts my damage in half. So a thing that's really easy to fuck up in this character is Elemental Equilibrium. And our character with Explosive Arrow, we have basically two stages. One where the arrow is first sticking in the target, and the second when it goes off. Because we're always putting new arrows in the target, we're basically always going to be hitting it with something first before it actually detonates for the fire damage. So because of this, we can actually make sure that we have either cold or lightning or both, and we're getting minus 25 damage or exposure to the enemy target. Just make sure that you do not have any flat fire damage anywhere on this build. Percentage fire is fine, etc. But like Fizz is extra fire, no good. You want to make sure that in like your tooltip or your character pane, you want to look through it. It should say no fire damage there. Another thing as well, do remember Elemental Overload has been changed. So it's no longer a buff in the top left corner. It is like a small diamond on your actual Explosive Arrow. In the end game, you can see that we're focusing more on like really good gear and giving you some like things to actually invest in. There is also a lot of tips and tricks in the notes, a lot of extensive stuff here, like how to craft, what to look for, common mistakes, and how to calculate your attack speed and things like that. Quick demonstration on how to calculate the attack speed. It is your buff duration, which is if you are using Malevolence, which you sometimes swap to for bosses. Malevolence is very important, and that'll change your fuse or buff duration to 1.44. Without it, so while you're running Grace, you would have a 1.2. And then you multiply this by your number of totems, which is 6. And then you multiply that by your attack rate, which in this case, what we're looking at is 249. I also like to add +1 because you're getting always 1 free fuse. I've seen a lot of other people that are doing explosive arrow guides are saying you get 6 free fuses, but that is completely unrealistic and you will never have that amount of damage then. But +1 is very safe, and I would always rather err on the side of caution and making sure everyone has a good time with the build. So with the current stuff, we have 22 fuses. Very, very nice. For the playstyle of the build, it's literally just running around placing totems. I'm usually just spamming my potions, running into a pack, throwing down 1 or 2 totems, and running on. And then you will end up doing some backtracking for loot. I know some people don't love that, but honestly, it's such a joy to play, and it just melts really nicely. It's so incredibly tanky as well. You basically take no damage from hits. You will absolutely notice every degen, like any damage over time just destroys you, and you will have to like flask your way through it. And that is scary in boss fights because we don't get that much sustain. That's why I really like things like marble amulets in the end game, getting as much life regen you can on gear, because if you're able to get 800, you have so nice sustain in boss fights, especially with the tank that this build offers. But yeah, and then for bosses, the playstyle would be that you're putting down totems, then you're using your Arcanist brand. The Arcanist brand is so good because it's not just cursing the boss, it's also doing Flame Surge. And even though we have the Ancestral Bond node, that means that we can't do damage, Flame Surge counts as reflected damage, so this actually bypasses that. And that is such a large part of your endgame damage, so do make sure that you actually use the Arcanist brand setup. So there are a few things that are really, really important to mention for this build. The belt is super important for your damage, and you want to use either attack or elemental quality on it, because that'll take it from 35 faster to 42. And the way ignites you inflict with attack steal damage faster works on this build is that it becomes very similar to more damage. It's actually, if you see here, combined total damage or total damage per ignite, what that means is if we did 1 ignite and we let that burn, that would do 14 million damage. So that's why you can see here that Diadian Dawn, while it doesn't make our ignite damage any different, it makes the damage per second massively better. So very, very important. And yeah, generally it always has good enough duration. Another thing that is fairly important for the build, however, I think a lot of people misunderstand what Rain of Splinters is for. This is purely for clearing. So if you don't like getting a Rain of Splinters, because it is a lot of all orbs to get one, you can also use a Dying Sun. Like whenever Rain of Splinters is like 2 to 4 divines plus, especially for a good roll, and honestly, it's also something you don't need a good roll for. The worst roll is probably what I would get, because I have so much damage for clearing anyway. So I felt a little bit bad when I saw the price of Rain of Splinters being so expensive last league, because I think at some point it was 8 to 10 divines or something. And I'm like, I wouldn't pay that. So I just want to make really sure that people understand that it doesn't give you more damage. It in fact gives you less damage. A very important thing for this build, I cannot stress this enough. Do not get a quiver with Pierce. Do not get Pierce anywhere. And do not get a quiver or a bow with 1 additional projectile. Now, the reason for this is you will fire in a V around the boss. So you're basically silhouetting whatever you're trying to attack. So then those 2 mistakes are the number 2 things. Bandits is in the config here, and so are the gods. So an absolute amazing league starter choice. It's been such a blast for me to play. The thing that's really good for this build is I have something called an Everything Explained. It's like a 5 or 7 hour video of me taking this character completely from scratch, assuming that I have no stash tabs, nothing at all. And yeah, playing it as I was a first time player and explaining everything that I find for the first time, even things like basic currency, sockets, And you just watch that while you're playing. So if you do know somebody that's trying it for the first time, that is a good recommendation. It is from last league, but there's so few changes that actually affect the build. So definitely worth checking out. And thank you guys so much for watching. This is a super solid all-rounder. I hope you guys have a great league start in Crucible. Thank you for watching. Stop if you liked the video, but more importantly, try to die less than I do.